The diplomat brought a human bodyguard. The war ended in 3 minutes. Part 1. They said the galaxy had rules. Not laws. Not morals. Not treaties written in ink and hope. Rules. And the first rule was simple: never bring humans into a negotiation unless you were prepared for the conversation to end in blood, silence, or both. So when High Diplomat Vero of the Lethari Dominion stepped off the void cruiser Sable Oath and onto the glass-black landing platform of Karth Prime, the entire planetary council noticed something unusual. He had brought a human. Not an army. Not a fleet. Not even a squad. Just one. The human walked half a step behind him. No armor that gleamed. No ceremonial weapons. No banners or intimidation displays. Just a dark coat, matte black, cut like something between military utility and old earth elegance. Hands relaxed. Eyes scanning everything like it had already tried to kill him once and failed. To most species, humans looked wrong. Too still when calm. Too fast when moving. Too quiet when deciding. This one looked like a thought that had learned how to kill. The council chamber of Karth Prime was built to intimidate. Massive vaulted ceilings. Gravity subtly skewed to make smaller species feel weightless and exposed. Thousands of luminous observers floating behind containment fields like gods watching a petri dish. And at the center sat the triarchs of the Zalcor hegemony. They had called this summit. They had summoned the Dominion. And they had made one demand. Surrender all human alliance systems within 10 cycles, or be erased. Vero stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back. Calm. Controlled. The practiced posture of a diplomat who had signed more ceasefires than most species had years of recorded history. Behind him, the human stopped exactly 1 pace behind his left shoulder. Not closer. Not farther. Perfect spacing. Like a loaded weapon placed on a table and politely asked not to fire. The lead triarch, Kesh Valtor, leaned forward. "You brought a pet," it said, voice dripping contempt. "How theatrical!" A ripple of laughter moved through the council spectators. Vero did not react. But the human did. Just slightly. A tilt of the head. Like something inside him had just noted the speaker's existence, and filed it under temporary. Vero spoke. "This is my bodyguard." "That thing?" another triarch snapped. "We were told humans were dangerous. This one looks like it belongs in a labor pen." The human finally spoke. His voice was low. Not loud. Not aggressive. Worse. Certain. "I've been in labor pens," he said. "You don't survive those unless you're useful or lucky." A pause. Then, almost casually, "I'm either." Silence fell. Not because of fear. Because of calculation. The Zalcor were predators of politics. They could smell weakness the way a shark smells blood. And now they were trying to decide what they were looking at. Vero raised a hand slightly. "We are here to negotiate." Kesh Valtor leaned back. "There is nothing to negotiate. You are a minor species protected under outdated galactic charter sympathy clauses. That protection expires today." A soft chime echoed through the chamber. The countdown had begun. 10 cycles until extermination authorization. Vero sighed quietly. "You're certain you want to proceed?" Another wave of laughter. "Yes," Valtor said. "Unless your human pet wishes to beg for mercy." The human smiled. It was small. Almost polite. "I don't beg," he said. Then he added, "I observe." Something in that word made the chamber feel colder. But before anyone could respond, a security officer stepped forward, towering, plated in gravitic armor, hand resting on a disintegration baton. "This is over," it snarled. "Remove the creature from the chamber." The human looked at it. Really looked at it. Like a mechanic inspecting a broken machine. "You're shaking," the human said. "I am not," the officer replied. "You are," the human corrected. "Right hand tremor. Elevated respiration. You've never seen one of my kind up close, have you?" The officer hesitated. That was all it took. The human moved. Not fast in a way the eye could follow. Fast in a way the brain couldn't accept. One moment he was still. The next, the officer's wrist was in the human's hand, baton redirected upward. A sharp crack. The baton discharged into the ceiling. The officer hit the ground before its mind understood it was supposed to be unconscious. No blood. No spectacle. Just absence of standing. The chamber erupted. Guards surged forward. Energy weapons flared. Diplomatic immunity was forgotten in the way all empires forget rules when they realize they are no longer in control of a situation. Varro didn't move. He just adjusted his cuff. Like this was slightly inconvenient scheduling. The human stepped forward again. Still calm. Still alone. You misunderstand something, he said quietly, almost conversational. A guard fired. The bolt didn't hit him. It hit where he was. He wasn't there anymore. Now he was beside the guard. One strike to the throat plate. One to the knee joint. A twist that turned armor into a coffin. Another guard fired. The human caught the weapon mid-discharge. Bare hand. Metal screamed. Energy arced harmlessly into the floor. He tilted his head again. You think I'm here to fight you? He said. He squeezed. The weapon folded like paper. I'm here to decide if you're worth negotiating with after. The chamber fell into controlled chaos. The Zalcor were not primitive. They were not weak. They were trained killers. But they were trained for war. This was not war. This was correction. And the human moved like someone correcting an error. Varro finally spoke, voice calm over the rising violence. I did advise caution, he said mildly. A triarch screamed. Kill it! Every weapon in the chamber fired at once. And for the first time, the human stopped moving. He stood still. In the center of it. Energy bolts, plasma arcs, kinetic slugs, everything converging on one point of impossible survival. Then, nothing touched him. Not because of shields. Not because of technology. Because the moment before impact, every weapon stopped firing. Not jammed. Not hacked. Stopped. The chamber went silent again. The human exhaled. Better, he said. Then he turned his head slightly toward Varro. You didn't tell me they were this emotional. Varro shrugged. I didn't want to influence your expectations. The human nodded thoughtfully, as if reviewing a disappointing restaurant. Then he looked at the triarchs. You wanted surrender, he said. A pause. Long enough for fear to grow teeth. You just got a demonstration instead. Kesh Valtor stood slowly. Its voice trembled, not with fear, but rage. What are you? The human considered the question. Then answered honestly. Annoyed. And then softer. But I can be worse. Outside the chamber, alarms began to scream. Not local. Planet-wide. Fleet-wide. Because in orbit above Karth Prime, every Zalcor warship had just received the same transmission. A single human-coded signal override. 3 words. Engagement authorized. Varro finally looked up. Ah, he said. That's my cue. The human rolled his shoulders once, like loosening tension before a long job. Diplomat, he said. Yes? You brought me here to talk them down, didn't you? Varro smiled faintly. I brought you here, he said, in case they refused to listen. The human nodded. Good. He glanced at the silent, trembling council. Then added, because I really don't like repeating myself. And somewhere above Karth Prime, the first Zalcor dreadnought lost power to its engines. Not from attack. From command override. From human authorization. From the realization that diplomacy had already ended. And war was just beginning to catch up. The first thing the galaxy learned about human escalation protocols was this. They didn't escalate. They decided. And once a decision was made, the universe was simply informed afterward. Above Karth Prime, The Zalcor dreadnought Veshtyr dominance drifted for exactly 4.7 seconds after the command override signal. Then its entire bridge lit up with red warnings that meant nothing anymore. Power lost. Weapons locked. Navigation overridden. Authority core reassigned. Admiral Krelvas stared at the tactical display, frozen in disbelief. "This is impossible," he whispered. A junior officer screamed. "We're being hacked." "No," another corrected, voice breaking. "That's not a hack signature. That's military authority transfer." "To who?" Krell snapped. The screen answered for them. "Authority, Humanity Accord, Tactical Node Prime." Silence. Not fear now. Recognition. Because every military in the known sectors had heard of it. A myth. A warning. A contingency buried in treaty footnotes, and denied by governments that didn't want to admit it existed. A human-level override protocol. Only authorized in one condition. Diplomatic failure with existential threat classification. Krelvas stood slowly. "They call the Bodyguard," he said quietly. And then the ship shuddered. Not from impact. From loss of control over itself. Inside the council chamber of Karth Prime, Vero adjusted his posture again, as if the situation had mildly improved. The human stood still beside him. No longer moving. No longer fighting. Just watching. The Triarchs were no longer laughing. That stage of emotion had died 5 minutes ago. Now there was only recalculation. Kesh Valtor's voice came out harsher than before, but thinner. "You violated sovereign protocol." Vero sighed. "You declared extermination before negotiations concluded. We were within our rights." The human finally spoke again. "You always say that," he muttered. Vero glanced at him. "It's a cultural habit." "It's a bad one," the human replied. A beat of silence. Then the chamber shook slightly as distant explosions echoed through the planetary's shield grid. The Zalcor defense satellites had begun firing at something they could not track. Something that was already inside their network. Something moving through their command structure like a ghost in a machine. Kesh Valtor backed away slightly. "What is happening?" Vero looked up, almost apologetically. "You attempted to enforce a death sentence on a protected diplomatic entity." "We did not." "You did," Vero interrupted gently. "You just didn't realize the human wasn't the protected entity." The chamber went still. Even the guards hesitated. The human tilted his head. "I think I like where this is going," he said. Vero continued, voice calm, almost instructional. "You assumed I brought him as protection for myself." "Yes," Valtor said. "That's because you still think diplomacy is about protecting diplomats." A faint smile. "It isn't." The human stepped forward half a pace. Just enough to be noticed. "You made a threat against a human-aligned system," he said. "That activates Clause 7. Kesh Valtor narrowed its eyes. "There is no Clause 7. Vero sighed again. "There is always a Clause 7. You just don't read far enough." A new alarm tone cut through the chamber. Different from before. Lower. Heavier. Not panic. Finality. A holographic projection flickered into existence above the council dais. A human emblem. Simple. Unadorned. Terrifying in its simplicity. Then a voice, not from any speaker in the room, but everywhere at once. "Confirmation received. Hostile extermination intent detected." The Triarchs froze. Kesh Valtor whispered, "That's not possible. There are no human fleets within this sector." Vero glanced upward. "Correct." The human added softly. "We don't need fleets." The hologram continued. "Deployment authorized, Consulate Shadow Response Unit." A pause. Then, "Target classification, governmental." Another pause. "Execution window, 3 minutes." The words hung in the air like a sentence already carried out. Kesh Valtor turned slowly toward Vero. "You brought a weapon," it said, voice trembling now. Vero corrected gently. "I brought a deterrent." The human exhaled. Technically, he said, I'm off duty. That did not help. Outside the chamber, the sky over Karth Prime began to change. Ships were not arriving. They were already there. Invisible until now. Folded into orbital shadow layers, buried in electromagnetic silence, existing only as absence. Then they revealed themselves. Not as a fleet. As a pattern. A geometrical arrangement of human-made presence that made no tactical sense to anyone except those who built it. And every Zalcor ship that tried to lock onto them found only one thing. Empty space where reality used to be. Inside the chamber, panic finally broke. A guard lunged at the human. It didn't reach him. It stopped mid-motion. Frozen. Not physically restrained. Not killed. Just paused. Like a system waiting for permission that would never come. The human didn't even look at it. Stop wasting motion, he said quietly. Vero looked at the frozen guard. They're not wasting it. They're learning they don't control their own reflexes anymore. The human nodded. That part always takes a minute. Kesh Valtor backed toward the exit. You are committing genocide, it hissed. Vero's tone sharpened slightly. No, the human added. We're preventing one. A beat. Then Vero continued. You issued an extinction-level order against a protected civilization asset. The human smiled faintly. And now you're finding out why that clause exists. Outside, the first Zalcor defense moon went dark. Not destroyed. Not attacked. Just switched off. Like a lamp. And in orbit, the unseen human presence tightened its grip on the war space like a hand closing around a throat. The 3-minute window had begun. And somewhere deep in human command space, an operator watched the timer tick down and said only one thing. Let's see who still thinks diplomacy is optional. Back on Karth Prime, Vero finally stepped slightly aside. For the first time. Giving the chamber a full, unobstructed view of the human. The bodyguard stretched his neck once. Like a man preparing to finish paperwork. Diplomat, he said. Vero didn't look away from the Triarchs. Yes? How bad do you want this place intact? Vero considered. Then answered honestly. As intact as possible. The human nodded. Good. He glanced at the frozen guard beside him. Because I'm done being polite. And somewhere above them, the galaxy began to learn the second rule about humans. They don't start wars. They end them on schedule. The galaxy had a saying about human retaliation. It wasn't recorded in treaties. It wasn't taught in academies. It was whispered in barracks, stamped into encrypted military briefings, and erased from public archives faster than it could spread. But it always came back. The same sentence. If a human stops talking, you are already out of time. On Karth Prime, that time had just expired. The sky over the capital fractured into layers of silent geometry. Zalcor orbital defenses, once proud symbols of dominance, now drifted like dead thoughts. Some tried to fire. Some tried to retreat. Some simply ceased to receive instructions and continued acting on old ones, like bodies still twitching after the mind had gone. And then the humans arrived. Not ships. Not fleets. Not even forces, in the traditional sense. They were interruptions. Gaps in enemy control systems where authority used to be. A Zalcor tactical officer on the Veshtiwar dominance screamed. We're being boarded! Another snapped back. By what? I don't see. Then the ship's internal lights shifted. Not dimmed. Reassigned. Entire corridors flickered from red emergency lighting to calm neutral white, as if the vessel had been politely repainted from the inside. And in every sealed bulkhead, every secured corridor, every locked command chamber, doors unlocked themselves. Because someone, somewhere, had already decided they were no longer necessary. On the surface, the council chamber trembled again. Not from impact. From something far worse. Control loss at planetary scale. Kesh Valtor stood frozen near the exit, its voice barely functional. This is impossible, planetary defense grids cannot be overridden externally. Vero glanced at it. You're right, he said. They can't. The human added, almost casually. That's why we don't override them. A pause. Then, we replace them. The chamber lights flickered. For a brief moment, every holographic system in the room displayed something new. Not Zelkor architecture. Not Dominion authority codes. Human interface signatures. Simple. Efficient. Absolute. And beneath it, a single phrase. Civilian preservation priority active. Kesh Valtor snapped. We are not civilians! The human looked at it. Really looked again. And for the first time, there was something colder behind his eyes. Not anger. Disappointment. That's the problem, he said softly. Silence fell. Even Vero didn't interrupt. The human stepped forward into the center of the chamber. No weapons raised against him now. Because weapons no longer meant anything in here. You built an empire on the idea that strength makes you right, he said. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. But you forgot something important. A pause. Outside, another orbital platform shut down without explosion. Just silence. You only stay right, he continued, until something stronger decides to stop listening. He gestured slightly upward, as if indicating the invisible war happening above the planet. And we stopped listening 3 minutes ago. On the Veshtiwira dominance, Admiral Krell Voss finally understood what panic really felt like. Not fear of death. Not fear of defeat. Fear of irrelevance. Reports flooded in. Entire fleets losing command cohesion. Weapons systems refusing authorization codes. AI cores rewriting their own loyalty structures mid-execution. One officer screamed, "They're not attacking us. Our systems are agreeing with them." Another whispered, "That's not war, that's administration." Krell slammed a fist onto the tactical console. "Countermeasures." A pause. The console responded politely. "Countermeasures require authorization from higher authority." Krell barked, "I am the highest authority." Another pause. Then, negative. That was the moment he understood. Not defeat. Not destruction. Replacement. Back on the surface, the human tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something distant. Then he spoke again. "Diplomat." Vero nodded slightly. "Yes? How many of them signed the extermination order?" Vero didn't hesitate. "All triarchs. 16 subcounselors. 2 fleet admirals." The human exhaled. "That's inconvenient." Vero raised an eyebrow. "Why?" The human looked at him. "Because now I have to decide if I'm cleaning up a government, or an ideology." A pause. Then Vero said quietly, "That's why I brought you instead of a fleet." The human gave a faint, humorless smile. "You always say the nice version of terrible things," Vero replied calmly. "It helps morale." The chamber shook again. This time not from distant war, but from something landing. Something heavy. Something final. A sound like gravity remembering where it belonged. The council chamber doors didn't open. They simply ceased to be locked. And through them walked the first human ground delegation asset. Not soldiers. Not marines. Not diplomats. A single operative. Marked only by a thin line of insignia across the collarbone. The Zalkor guards tried to raise weapons. Their weapons did not respond. The operative glanced around the chamber, then spoke into a wrist device. "Package secured. High-value hostiles contained. Diplomatic asset confirmed." Then he looked at Vero. "Sir?" he said. Vero nodded slightly. "Status?" The operative gestured upward. "Orbital situation stabilized. Majority of hostile command nodes neutralized. Remaining resistance is administrative confusion." The human bodyguard, still standing at Vero's shoulder, snorted quietly. "Administrative confusion," he repeated. "That's a new one." The operative looked at him. It's accurate. The bodyguard shrugged. So as they panicked and tripped over their own empire. A beat. Even Vero almost smiled. Kesh Valtor finally snapped. This is not war, it shouted. This is annihilation without honor. The human turned his head slowly toward it. And the room felt smaller. Not physically. Morally. You want honor? He asked. A pause. Honor was in the room when you signed a genocide order. Silence. You ignored it. Another pause. Then softer. We didn't. The chamber went still again. Because that was the real difference. Not strength. Not technology. Not fleets or weapons or empires. Attention. Humans remembered what others chose to forget. And punished it accordingly. Outside, the planetary shield grid collapsed, not explosively, but peacefully. Like a system that had decided it was no longer needed. And in orbit, the Zalcor fleet stopped existing as an organized force. Not destroyed. Not annihilated. Just reassigned. To nothing. The human bodyguard stepped back toward Vero. Well, he said. 3 minutes is generous. They lasted, what, 2.5? Vero checked nothing. 2 minutes, 48 seconds. The human nodded. Sloppy, he said. Vero replied mildly. We can bill them for the remaining time. That finally earned a faint laugh from the operative. The Zalcor Triarchs, still alive, still present, stood in the center of a chamber that no longer belonged to them. Kesh Valtor whispered, almost broken now. What happens to us? The human looked at it for a long moment. Then answered honestly. That depends. A pause. If you can stop being what you were, you get to exist. Another pause. If you can't. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Because everyone understood the rest now. Even the Empire. Especially the Empire. And above Karth Prime, the galaxy quietly updated its records. War status, concluded, human intervention. Duration, 3 minutes. Outcome, negotiation successful. Notes, do not repeat incident. They always asked the wrong question after a human intervention. Not, how did we lose? Not, what was the strategy? Not even, what weapon did they use? The real question, the one no empire liked to face, was simpler. When did we become a problem worth correcting? On Karth Prime, that question arrived too late to matter. The council chamber was quiet now. Not the silence of peace. The silence of systems that had stopped pretending they were in control. Kesh Valtor stood in the center of the room like a statue that had forgotten it was ever worshipped. The remaining Triarchs no longer argued. No longer threatened. No longer even postured. That part of them had burned out first. Vero finally stepped forward. Not dramatically. Not triumphantly. Just, like a man finishing paperwork. The human bodyguard stayed slightly behind him again, hands loose at his sides, expression unreadable. The human operative had already left. No ceremony. No farewell. Just mission completion and disappearance back into the machinery of human silence. Vero looked at the Triarchs. You will remain in custody, he said calmly, until the Dominion Council reviews your status. Kesh Valtor let out a dry, broken sound. Our status? The human spoke before Vero could. Alive, he said simply. A pause. That's your current status. It hit harder than any threat. Because it meant there was still a decision pending. Outside, the planet was no longer under siege. It was under review. Human systems didn't just destroy threats. They classified them. Sorted them. Rewrote them if possible. Removed them if not. And Karth Prime had just been marked as something unusual. High-value cultural asset, requires intervention, not extermination. That alone had saved billions. Not mercy. Efficiency. The kind that didn't care what survived, only what was necessary. Vero turned slightly toward the human. You satisfied? He asked quietly. The human considered the question for a long moment. That was unusual. He usually answered immediately. Finally, he shrugged. They folded faster than expected, he said. But they were loud about it. Vero raised an eyebrow. That's your evaluation? The human nodded once. If someone screams about extermination in a room full of witnesses, they usually don't understand consequences, he said. A pause. Then softer. Now they do? Kesh Valtor suddenly spoke again. Its voice was smaller now. Not commanding. Not political. Just something that used to matter. You could have taken everything, it said. You controlled our fleets in seconds. You controlled our world in minutes. The human looked at it. Vero didn't interrupt. That meant he wanted to hear this too. The Triarch continued, quieter now. Why leave us alive? The chamber held its breath. Even the system seemed to wait. The human bodyguard exhaled slowly. Then answered. Because death is easy, he said. A pause. And we're tired of easy solutions. Another pause. That's your chance. Silence. Not disbelief now. Understanding. Uncomfortable, unwanted understanding. Vero stepped forward again. You are no longer a governing authority, he said. You are a monitored reconstruction state. Kesh Valtor laughed once, weak, bitter. Reconstruction? Vero nodded. Yes. He gestured slightly toward the sky. Your economy will be stabilized. Your military dissolved. Your command structures audited. A pause. And your history rewritten where necessary. The human added, almost casually. Don't worry. We keep the parts that explain how not to repeat you. That landed differently. Not as insult. As warning. Outside, ships began to leave orbit. Not in retreat. In occupation reversal. Human assets withdrawing as quickly as they had appeared. As if they had never been there at all. Only the absence remained. An absence, the galaxy was learning, was very much a form of presence when humans were involved. Vero turned toward the exit. The human followed. But before they left, Kesh Valtor spoke one last time. Not loudly. Not defiantly. Just honestly. You will be feared for this. The human stopped. Slowly turned back. And for the first time, his expression changed. Not anger. Not pride. Something older. Worn. Tired. We already are, he said. A pause. Then, we just prefer being effective while it lasts. And then he walked out. The corridors of Karth Prime were no longer war corridors. They were quiet again. But not normal quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after something powerful has decided not to stay. Vero walked beside the human. For a while either spoke. Then Vero said, You were efficient. The human gave a short laugh. That's what people say when they don't want to admit they were terrified. Vero didn't deny it. That was answer enough. As they reached the landing platform, the void cruiser Sable Oath waited, unchanged, patient, indifferent. Vero paused at the ramp. You know, he said, they'll rebuild. They always do. The human nodded. I know. Vero looked at him. And if they do it again? The human stepped onto the ramp. Didn't hesitate. Didn't look back. Then said, almost lightly, Then we'll get faster. Behind them, Karth Prime remained intact. A functioning world. A humbled empire. A surviving mistake. And above it all, one final message burned into every surviving Zalcor system core. Humanity Accord status, active. Do not reinitiate hostile policy. Next response window, 0 warning. And somewhere in the quiet machinery of human command space, a log entry was closed. No celebration. No praise. Just a simple line. Diplomatic bodyguard deployed. Outcome achieved. Minimal structural loss. Good work. The human closed his eyes for a moment. Then opened them again. Another world waited. Another negotiation. Another possible mistake. And the galaxy, finally learning, held its breath every time a human stepped off a ship. Because now it understood the truth behind the legend. Humans weren't sent to win wars. They were sent when someone had already decided to lose theirs. And,